3 years ago, I lost nearly a third of my tomato crop to early blight. And the year before that, it was powdery mildew on my squash that wiped out an entire bed. I was doing everything the books told me: pruning, spacing, rotating crops, even spraying copper fungicide every 10 days like clockwork. And I still watched plant after plant turn brown, wilt, and die. Then I walked over to my Amish neighbor Eli's place, not 2 miles down the road, and his tomatoes looked like something out of a catalog. Deep green, heavy with fruit, and not a single spotted leaf in the bunch. No fungicide, no copper, no sulfur spray, nothing out of a bottle. I asked him flat out how he does it, and what he told me over the next hour changed the way I think about plant disease entirely. Today I am going to walk you through exactly how the Amish prevent plant disease without a single chemical spray. The same methods I have been using on my homestead for the last 3 growing seasons, with results I frankly did not think were possible. And stay with me to the end, because I will share a fermented plant treatment Eli taught me that stops blight in its tracks, something I have never seen in a single gardening book or university extension guide. Now, I want to be honest with you. For most of my 30 years of homesteading, I treated plant disease the same way most of us do. I waited until I saw a problem, then I reacted. Spotted leaves on the tomatoes? Time for copper spray. White fuzz on the zucchini? Break out the neem oil? Yellow patches on the cucumber vines? Must be time for another trip to the garden center. And every year it felt like I was running the same losing race. I would knock a disease back for a week or two, then it would return, often worse than before. If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. I was right there with you for 2 decades. I thought disease was just something you manage season after season with better and stronger products. Then I started spending real time around Eli and a few other Amish families in our area of southeastern Pennsylvania. And I saw something that completely reset my thinking. These families were not managing disease. They were preventing it from ever taking hold. And the difference between those two approaches is everything. There is a way of thinking in Amish communities that Eli once described to me with a word I had to ask him to repeat 3 times: Ordnung. It is a German word that roughly translates to order or the way things are arranged. In Amish life, it governs how the community organizes itself. But in the garden, it means something very practical. Everything has a place. Everything has a purpose. And the arrangement of the garden itself is what keeps it healthy. Eli told me once, "Hank, disease does not just show up. You invite it in with how you set things up." That stuck with me. These are families with 8, 10, sometimes 12 people sitting down at one table. Every square foot of that garden has to produce, and they cannot afford to lose a crop to something preventable. So they design their gardens from the ground up to keep disease out. Not with sprays, not with products, but with arrangement, timing, and soil. Here is exactly how they do it, and how you can start doing it this season. The first thing you need to understand is that almost every common plant disease, whether it is early blight, late blight, powdery mildew, downy mildew, fusarium wilt, or bacterial leaf spot, starts in the soil and splashes up onto the leaves. When rain hits bare ground, it kicks up tiny particles of soil that carry fungal spores and bacteria right onto the lower leaves of your plants. From there, the disease climbs upward leaf by leaf. That is how blight moves through a tomato patch. That is how powdery mildew gets its foothold on squash. The Amish answer to this is aggressive mulching, and I mean aggressive. Here is what to do. As soon as your transplants are in the ground and the soil has warmed to at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit, lay down 4 to 6 inches of straw mulch around the base of every plant. Not 2 inches, not a thin scattering, a full 4 to 6 inches, thick enough that you cannot see the soil underneath. Pull the mulch to within 2 to 3 inches of each plant stem, but do not pile it directly against the stem because that invites rot. The reason this works is simple physics. When rain falls on a thick layer of straw, it absorbs into the mulch instead of splashing soil particles upward. You are putting a physical barrier between the disease reservoir in the soil and the vulnerable leaves above. University of Connecticut research confirmed that straw mulched tomato plots showed 40 to 60% less early blight infection compared to bare soil plots. The Amish figured this out generations ago just by watching what happened. Now, the Amish prefer wheat straw or oat straw because it breaks down slowly and does not mat together the way hay does. Avoid hay if you can, because it often contains weed seeds that will create a whole different headache. If you cannot find straw, untreated wood chips work as a second choice, but use them only around established plants, not seedlings, because fresh wood chips can temporarily tie up nitrogen near the soil surface as they decompose. If you are in zones 3 through 5, wait until 2 to 3 weeks after your last frost to mulch heavily. The soil needs to warm up first. Mulching too early in cold climates keeps the ground cold and slows root development. In zones 7 through 9, you can mulch earlier, even in late March, because soil temperatures are already climbing. Now that you have got that disease barrier in place, here is where the Amish approach really starts to separate from what most of us were taught. The second major piece of disease prevention is airflow, and most conventional gardens get this badly wrong. Think about what happens when you plant tomatoes. 18 inches apart in a row, which is what a lot of spacing guides recommend. By midsummer, those plants have grown together into a solid wall of foliage. Leaves overlap, moisture gets trapped, and air cannot circulate through the canopy. That warm, humid, stagnant environment is exactly where fungal diseases thrive. Powdery mildew, early blight, septoria leaf spot, they all love still, moist air. The Amish space their tomatoes a full 30 to 36 inches apart within the row, and they keep rows at least 4 feet apart. I know that sounds like a lot of wasted space, but here is the thing Eli told me that changed my perspective. He said, I would rather have 8 healthy plants that each give me 15 pounds than 12 sick plants that each give me 5. The math works out in favor of wider spacing every time when disease is in the equation. On top of the wider spacing, Amish gardeners prune the lower 12 to 18 inches of their tomato plants completely bare. Every sucker, every leaf below that line gets removed. This does 2 things. It lifts the canopy away from the soil surface where spores are concentrated, and it opens up airflow at the base of the plant where moisture tends to collect. Do this pruning in the morning when the plants are dry. Never prune wet plants because open wounds on wet tissue are an invitation for bacterial infection. For squash and cucumbers, the Amish use a similar principle but apply it differently. Instead of letting vines sprawl across the ground where leaves sit in constant contact with moist soil, many Amish gardeners train their cucumber vines up a simple trellis made from wooden stakes and twine. Even a basic structure of 2 5-foot stakes with horizontal strings every 8 to 10 inches gives the vines somewhere to climb. The leaves dry faster, air moves through freely, and the disease pressure drops dramatically. I started trellising my cucumbers 3 years ago after watching Eli do it, and I have not had a case of downy mildew since. If you are picking up what I am putting down and you want the complete system for growing enough food to feed your family year-round using these traditional Amish methods, I put everything I have learned from Eli and 3 decades of homesteading into a guide called Homestead Hank's 30-Day Amish Garden Protocol. It covers the full growing system, soil revival methods, natural disease and pest defense, water-wise design, and year-round harvest planning. You can grab it for $19.99 at homesteadhankbooks.com. Just click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. All right, let us keep going. Here is where the next piece of the puzzle comes together. And this is the one that made me feel a little foolish for not figuring it out sooner. Crop rotation. Now I know you have heard of crop rotation. Every gardening book mentions it, but there is a difference between knowing about rotation and actually doing it the way the Amish do it, with discipline and a long enough cycle to matter. Most backyard gardeners, myself included for years, rotate loosely. Maybe you move your tomatoes from one side of the garden to the other. Maybe you swap where the beans and the peppers go. But if you are planting tomatoes in a spot where peppers were last year, you have not actually rotated out of that plant family. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and potatoes are all in the nightshade family, the Solanaceae, and they all share the same diseases. Fusarium wilt, verticillium wilt, and early blight pathogens build up in the soil year after year when any member of that family is planted in the same ground. The Amish run a strict 3 to 4 year rotation cycle. That means a spot where tomatoes grew this year will not see any nightshade family crop for at least 3 full years. Eli showed me a hand-drawn map on a piece of brown paper where he had his garden divided into 4 sections. Section 1 gets nightshades this year. Section 2 gets cucurbits. That is squash, cucumbers, and melons. Section 3 gets brassicas, your cabbage, broccoli, kale. Section 4 gets legumes and root crops. Every year, everything shifts one section clockwise. Simple, methodical, and devastatingly effective. Here is the science behind it. Most soil-borne fungal pathogens cannot survive longer than 2 to 3 years without a host plant from their target family. By the time nightshades return to a section after a 4-year absence, the pathogen population has crashed. You are essentially starving the disease out of your soil without doing anything except planning ahead. If your garden is small, you can still make this work. Even dividing your space into 3 sections and running a 3-year rotation makes a significant difference. The key is to never, and I mean never, follow a nightshade with a nightshade, or a cucurbit with a cucurbit. Write your plan down. Keep it on the fridge, in a notebook, wherever you will. Actually look at it each spring. The Amish map their rotations because memory alone is not reliable over 4 years, and they are right about that. Now here is where the Amish approach to disease prevention goes a level deeper than what most of us ever consider, and it connects directly back to the soil. Everything I have shared so far, the mulching, the spacing, the rotation, those are all about keeping disease organisms away from your plants. But this next piece is about making the plant itself strong enough to resist disease even when it does encounter a pathogen. The Amish build their soil with massive amounts of well-aged compost every single year, not as a nice bonus, but as the foundation of their entire approach. Eli spreads 3 to 4 inches of composted horse manure across his entire garden every fall after the last harvest, then again in spring before planting. That is a lot of organic matter, and it does something remarkable to the soil biology. Compost-rich soil is teeming with beneficial microorganisms, bacteria, and fungi that form relationships with plant roots. These microbes actually trigger a plant's own immune response, a process that soil scientists call induced systemic resistance. Research out of Cornell University and the Rodale Institute has shown that plants grown in biologically active, compost-amended soil produce higher levels of natural defensive compounds in their cell walls. They are physically tougher, their leaves are thicker. They resist penetration by fungal spores more effectively than plants grown in depleted soil. Here is the practical takeaway. If you are not already adding 2 to 3 inches of quality compost to your garden beds every year, start this season. If you can get aged animal manure composted for at least 6 months so it will not burn your plants, mix it in. The Amish compost everything: kitchen scraps, animal bedding, crop residues, and they let time do the work. After 2 to 3 seasons of consistent compost additions, you will see the difference not just in plant vigor, but in how your garden handles disease pressure. I noticed it clearly in my 3rd year. Plants that would have folded to early blight in the past were shrugging it off with a few spotted lower leaves and nothing more. This 5th piece is one that I resisted for years because it meant changing a habit I was attached to: watering. Specifically, how and when you water. For most of my gardening life, I watered with an overhead sprinkler. Set it up turn it on, let it rain down on the whole garden. Easy, efficient, and absolutely devastating for disease. Every time you wet the leaves of your plants, you are creating the exact conditions fungal diseases need to germinate and spread. Blight spores need 6 to 8 hours of continuous leaf moisture to infect a tomato plant. Powdery mildew thrives when leaves are damp in the evening and do not dry until morning. Overhead watering, especially in the afternoon or evening, is like rolling out a welcome mat for every fungal disease in your garden. The Amish water at the base of the plant, period. They use simple furrow irrigation, which is just a shallow trench dug alongside the row that you fill with water and let it soak in. Some use soaker hoses laid under the straw mulch, which is what I switched to and what I would recommend if you have access to them. The water goes directly into the soil, the leaves stay dry, and disease pressure drops immediately. Here's how to set it up. Lay a soaker hose along each row, about 3 to 4 inches from the base of your plants. Cover it with your straw mulch so it is hidden underneath. Water in the early morning, ideally before 8 in the morning, so any incidental moisture on leaves dries quickly in the morning sun. Run the soaker hose long enough to deliver about 1 inch of water per week to each bed. You can check this by placing a straight-sided container, like a tuna can, next to the hose and timing how long it takes to fill to 1 inch deep. If you are in zones 8 or 9, where summer temperatures regularly hit 95 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, you may need to water twice per week, but keep it at the base and keep it in the morning. In zones 3 through 5, once per week is usually sufficient, except during extended dry spells. The point is simple: wet the soil, not the plant. Eli said it to me plainly one morning. Roots drink water, Hank. Leaves do not. 3 years later, I have not gone back to overhead watering once. Let me share a few patterns I have noticed over the years. Things I used to do that I now understand were actually making my disease problems worse. The first pattern is leaving sick plant material in the garden. For years, when a tomato plant got blight, I would pull off the affected leaves and drop them right on the ground between the rows. I thought I was helping the plant by removing the damaged tissue, and I was, partway, but by leaving that infected material on the soil surface, I was seeding next year's blight outbreak. The Amish remove every piece of diseased plant material from the garden entirely. It goes into the burn pile or the trash, never into the compost, and never left on the ground. That one change alone made a noticeable difference my first season. The second pattern is working in the garden when plants are wet. I cannot tell you how many times I went out after a rain to stake up a fallen tomato or pull a few weeds. Every time I brushed against a wet plant, I was potentially transferring spores from one plant to the next on my hands and clothes. The Amish wait. They do their garden work in the morning after the dew has dried or on dry afternoons. It seems like a small thing, but fungal diseases spread on contact, and you are the contact. The third pattern is crowding plants together to maximize production. I did this for years, especially with tomatoes. I figured the more plants I could fit in, the more tomatoes I would get. What I actually got was a jungle of overlapping foliage that stayed damp all day and became a disease incubator by August. Eli's wider spacing felt like a waste of space to me the first time I saw it. Now I understand that the space between plants is not wasted. It is ventilation. It is your first line of defense. The fourth pattern is skipping the fall cleanup. After harvest, I used to leave spent plants standing in the garden until spring because I was tired and figured it did not matter. Those dead plants harbor overwintering fungal spores and bacteria that are ready to reinfect your new crops the moment warm weather returns. The Amish clear every bed down to bare soil in the fall, add their compost, and start the next season with a clean slate. Now, here is the technique I promised you at the beginning, the one Eli taught me that I have never found in any gardening book or extension publication. When Eli starts to see the very first hint of blight on his tomato plants, just a spot or two on the lowest leaves, he does not reach for a spray bottle. He reaches for a jar of fermented compost tea. Here is exactly how he makes it. Take a 5-gallon bucket and fill it with rainwater or well water. If you are using municipal tap water, fill the bucket and let it sit uncovered for 24 hours first so the chlorine can dissipate, because chlorine kills the beneficial microbes you are trying to cultivate. Add 4 to 5 heaping handfuls of finished, well-aged compost to the water. Then add 1 tablespoon of unsulfured blackstrap molasses, which feeds the beneficial bacteria and helps them multiply. Stir the mixture vigorously 2 to 3 times a day for 3 full days. You will notice it starts to smell earthy, almost like a forest floor after rain. That is the smell of active microbial life. After 3 days, strain the liquid through cheesecloth or an old burlap sack into a clean spray bottle or pump sprayer. Spray it directly onto the leaves of your plants, top and bottom, focusing on the lower canopy where disease typically starts. Apply in the early morning when the leaves are dry and the sun is not yet intense. Here's why this works. The beneficial bacteria and fungi in the compost tea physically colonize the leaf surface, occupying the same spaces that pathogenic fungi would need to land and germinate. They outcompete the disease organisms for both space and nutrients on the leaf. Research out of the Rodale Institute has documented measurable reductions in foliar disease when actively aerated compost teas are applied preventatively. Eli does not aerate his with a pump the way some modern guides recommend, and it still works. He has been doing it this way for as long as I have known him. Apply it once every 7 to 10 days during the growing season as a preventative, or every 4 to 5 days if you are seeing early signs of disease. It is not a cure for advanced infection. I want to be straight with you about that. If a plant is already heavily blighted, it is too late for tea and the plant should come out. But for early intervention and ongoing prevention, this fermented compost tea has been more effective in my garden than any copper spray I ever used, and it feeds the soil biology at the same time instead of disrupting it. If you want the complete disease prevention calendar, along with everything else I have learned from Eli and 40 years of homesteading, from soil revival to pest defense to year-round harvest planning, it is all in Homestead Hank's 30-day Amish garden protocol. The guide walks you through each method step by step so you can put this system in place on your own homestead this season. It is $19.99 at homesteadhankbooks.com. You can scan the QR code on screen right now or click the link down in the description. I put a lot of years into learning these methods, and I put a lot of care into writing them down clearly, so you do not have to spend 30 years figuring it out the hard way like I did. That is what I have learned from my Amish neighbors about keeping plant disease out of the garden without reaching for a single chemical spray. Mulch heavy to stop the splash. Space wide to let the air move. Rotate with discipline to starve disease out of the soil. Build your soil every year so your plants are strong enough to fight back on their own. Water the roots, not the leaves. And when you need a little extra help, brew up a batch of compost tea and let the microbes do the work. If any of this changed how you think about disease in your garden, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me what you have been dealing with, what you are going to try, and how it goes. Thanks for spending time with me today. I will see you in the next one.